Two big stories. City leaders are trying to improve response times for mental health crises after multiple people died in police custody.
That is simply too long. If someone is in crisis, crisis means now.
I'm going in depth on what changes the city council president wants to see. Plus, Governor Wes Moore officially launches his bid for re-election.
So we came into office with bold ideas and a new sense of urgency.
We're looking back at Governor Moore's first term and whether he can deliver on his campaign promises. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost. Governor Wes Moore is officially running for a second term. His campaign announcement comes as the governor's approval rating drops. A poll conducted in July shows only 50% of Marylanders think Moore's performance has been at least good or excellent. It also comes amid speculation, the possible eye for the White House in 2028. The governor has made more than a dozen appearances on national news programs since August 7th, although he says he is not running for president. Let's go through what is in the governor's campaign launch video and the details he left out.
When I launched my campaign for governor 4 years ago, I had never run for political office before.
Wes Moore kicks off his re-election video with a little history lesson of himself.
My background is I'm an Army combat veteran, and I ran one of the largest poverty-fighting organizations in this country.
Moore's military record has been in the crosshairs for years. Well, Mary and Kai, we're learning that these issues date back to before when Wes Moore was a candidate for governor. In 2022, Fox 45 News started digging into Moore's record and uncovered he allowed a false narrative about receiving a Bronze Star to perpetuate for years. The storyline starts in 2021 when Moore was introduced by Stephen Colbert as a decorated war veteran with a Bronze Star.
You're a decorated veteran of the Afghan War,
yes,
correct? Get the Bronze Star.
The problem, Moore did not have the Bronze Star at the time. We also found more instances where Moore failed to correct the record. 3 years later, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel repeats the same claim. Fox 45 News also uncovered this PBS transcript from an interview with Moore years before the Colbert Report interview, where the interviewer says Moore earned a Bronze Star. In 2024, the New York Times published a report about the missing Bronze Star, noting Moore included the award on his White House fellowship application in 2006. That's when Moore said his senior officer told him he could include the award because the paperwork had been submitted, but Moore never actually received the medal. In August last year, I pressed him on the issue and his own comments on the campaign trail.
I've taken full responsibility for what was in there, and yes, I understand that a superior officer told me to put it in there, but it wasn't his application. It was my application. So I'm taking full responsibility.
Governor Moore, when we asked you about this 2 years ago during the campaign, a spokesperson for your campaign said that you never claimed to have a Bronze Star, but now we've seen the application for the White House fellowship and that wasn't true. So do you regret the comments that you made or your campaign made that, looking back now, were inaccurate?
Yeah, I do regret the fact that I didn't go back and change it. Honestly, I'd forgotten about it after I put together the application. It was nearly 20 years ago, and I honestly just forgot about it. It was an honest mistake.
But when these questions were raised 2 years ago, you could have gone back to look at that application yourself, correct?
I honestly didn't think at that time to go back over every single piece of paper I filled out over the past 30 years of my life. When it was brought to my attention that it was on the application, frankly, it was a surprise to me until I remember the conversation that I had with him. It wasn't malintent, it wasn't malicious, it was an honest mistake.
In late December of 2024, Moore did receive the Bronze Star in a private ceremony in the governor's house in Annapolis. But the story isn't over. Fast forward to late this summer, when President Donald Trump revived the controversy with a single social media post, questioning whether Moore actually received this Bronze Star. That reigniting the national focus and forcing Moore to answer for it during his many network TV appearances as he fought with President Trump about the National Guard in Baltimore.
Why did you let it go on, even if it was a mistake, for years and years and years as you were celebrated as having a Bronze Star?
I'm very proud of my service to this country.
You did get the Bronze Star, but you got the Bronze Star 2 years ago. And
I
that
did.
2 years ago, you got the medal, you got a citation, you got a ceremony. but you claimed it in 2006 when you didn't have any of those things. So you would know if you got the Bronze Star. The question is, why did you claim it for so long before you got it?
I'm very proud of my service, and I'm thankful that the United States military has recognized my service in Afghanistan with both the Bronze Star and the Combat Action Badge. I'm thankful for the service that I did overseas.
You knew in those interviews you did not have one.
No, because even at the time of those interviews, it wasn't something that I even thought about. When I came home, it wasn't something that I even thought about. I didn't think about the fact that, hey, I wonder if my paperwork processed out. Now, I'm thankful that the military, after they found out that the paperwork was lost and didn't process, that they came back and awarded me the Bronze Star. So yes, I do have. So I do have a Bronze Star that I earned in Afghanistan and a Combat Action Badge that I earned in Afghanistan. So I'm proud of that, but that's not why I served.
But do you regret not correcting when you were introduced that way?
I mean, I don't regret not going back and consistently looking over my service records.
Moore's campaign launch video talks about several other issues impacting Maryland too, like the state's finances.
So we came into office with bold ideas and a new sense of urgency. We inherited a structural budget deficit and turned it into a surplus.
When Moore introduced his first budget, he had a different tune about Maryland's bottom line. He wrote in this letter, the state was in a fortunate financial position after former Governor Larry Hogan left a multi-million-dollar surplus. Moore says that extra money was COVID money and not sustainable.
I am proud to announce that our administration has reached an agreement on a framework for the final budget with the Maryland House of Delegates and the Maryland State Senate.
This year, Moore and Democrats in the General Assembly passed a budget with more than $1 billion in tax and fee increases. But he says,
we cut taxes for veterans and cut taxes for the middle class.
So we pressed him on that too.
When you talk to people around the state of Maryland, the biggest thing that they talk about is they say that you and Democrats in the State House have raised their taxes, and they point to the more than $1 billion tax and fee increases that went into effect this last year. So how do you really look at them and say that you are bringing fiscal discipline outside of the general fund when they also know that tax and fee increases have gone up under your leadership?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we continue to hear from people is a measure of appreciation that we have given the middle class a tax cut, that we have actually given veterans a tax cut. And at a time when you're watching the federal government, which is just given a tax cut to millionaires and billionaires, and in Maryland, the middle class just got a tax cut, I think middle class Marylanders appreciate the fact that we're working to bring affordability up inside of our state.
And that's not all.
But while we stand up for middle class Marylanders, the President of the United States is bending over backwards for billionaires and big corporations. Firing federal workers, gutting Medicaid, raising prices on everything from electricity to groceries.
When it comes to electricity and prices, people in Maryland are frustrated with the rising costs.
And any more budget building, my energy is high. Help us people out here. Help us, give us some type of help.
And energy bills are going up this month as a result of rising supply costs. But the energy crisis has been front and center in Maryland over the last year, especially since the state imports 40% of its energy needs. Republicans say it's the governor's own policies that are to blame.
We're not producing enough domestic in-state energy, and we have these really unscientific sort of faith-based beliefs about the need to reduce emissions to zero by 2035. We need to get away from that, but we need to really focus like a laser on getting energy production in the state back up. Supply will bring down the price.
As the campaign gets underway,
First, we need your help. So chip in, follow us, share this video.
Political experts say Marylanders know the reality they're living with every day, regardless of what the governor says.
When I heard those words about fiscal discipline, the first thing I thought of was a famous fictional character, Pinocchio. This just doesn't jive with what the reality is.
But politics are often about messaging.
It's not a lie if you believe it. And if he keeps repeating the message every day, everyone after a while will say, yeah, that's true, that's true.
And right now, Moore is sticking with what he believes will help him win a second term.
Join us, and let's keep building a state where we leave no one behind.
Now, Governor Moore has also spoken out about the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project, a controversial 70-mile transmission line that would stretch through Carroll, Frederick, and Baltimore counties. Landowners worry about how the project could impact their properties, while proponents say it's necessary to address the state's energy crisis. The governor has pushed back against it, saying he wants to stand with Marylanders and that he doesn't see why the transmission line is potentially necessary.
There are real flaws and real problems with this, and I have said long before that not only do I have a very real issue with this project and how it was maintained, I don't see how, if there are not changes to this, how this thing moves forward. So I saw the judge's ruling, but the judge's ruling does not change my opinion on it. I think this thing has very real problems.
But some critics of the transmission line worry the governor isn't doing enough to find a solution. Joanne Frederick from the Stop MPRP, a grassroots organization helping landowners fight the transmission line, says that she met with the governor's team, who indicated he approves of the Public Service Commission's process.
So the governor's office is certainly supporting the process that the state will conduct. And the governor, through his team, said that he is open to any and all of the above solutions to solve Maryland's energy challenges.
What does that mean?
Well, optimistically, it means that we can increase generation, as needs to be done in the state of Maryland, to avoid the need for transmission. You know, pessimistically, it could mean additional interregional transmission solutions and more lines running across Maryland.
Now, there are also questions about the governor's handling of the Department of Juvenile Services and its former secretary, Vincent Schiraldi. The governor has direct control over that role, but he did not order Schiraldi's resignation until June, after years of calls for Schiraldi's replacement. Those calls started at Schiraldi's confirmation in 2023. Critics argued he would not bring enough accountability to the department, pointing to a Washington Post op-ed he wrote indicating young people should not face the criminal justice system until they're 21 or even 25 years old. During Schiraldi's tenure, we saw several examples of repeat juvenile offenders, many of them already on ankle monitors when they were accused of crimes. Fox 45 News found the agency used two different types of ankle monitors and left out one of those types when it provided data on how many young people it was monitoring. Fox 45 also heard from whistleblowers inside the department who told us staffing shortages inside facilities left employees and young people feeling unsafe. Despite the concerns, the governor stood by Schiraldi time and time again. As Moore officially jumps into the 2026 gubernatorial race, the Republican field is also starting to take shape. Maryland Senate Minority Leader Steve Hershey announced last week on Fox 45 News In Depth that he's launching an exploratory committee to consider running for governor. He told us he was expecting Governor Moore to run for re-election, expressing concerns about Moore's fiscal policy during his first term.
Well, it wasn't surprising that Governor Moore was announcing his bid for re-election, but what was shocking is that he was boasting about his fiscal discipline. I think everybody in Maryland recognizes that Governor Moore inherited a $5 billion surplus and quickly turned that into a $3 billion deficit.
Governor Moore also called out his Republican challengers by name, telling them to, quote, come ready. Republican gubernatorial candidate Ed Hale says he was surprised by those comments.
Hey, it's surprising. I just got into this. I just became a politician maybe 5 months ago. So good for him. More the merrier.
All right, now joining me to talk about Governor Moore's re-election bid and next year's election is political analyst John Deedy. John, thanks as always for your insight and joining us. I want to talk about your insight. We talked a little bit earlier when the governor first announced, but now that you have had a little more time to kind of think about all of this, what's your takeaway from the governor's messaging that he seems to be putting out there as he launches his re-election effort?
First thing that jumped out on me and the messaging was the crime issue that he really talked about. In many ways, he may not want to say it, but he got pushed by President Trump in the fear of the National Guard coming in. And it's a strong, getting rid of Vincent Schiraldi was a good idea, great idea to put it politely, because it was a problem. Juvenile crime, it gets a lot of attention because usually the juvenile crime that we see is extremely reckless and dangerous. The state has tried to handle that a lot better. I think that the attention he has paid more and lowering also the temperature in the rhetoric with President Trump has been a good move on his part.
When it comes to the messaging about fiscal discipline, and he says that he cut spending and he calls it out of control spending in Annapolis, is that something that you would typically hear from a Democrat in a state like Maryland?
You wouldn't typically hear that because you usually associate spending cuts with Republicans. The thing is, while spending has been cut in some areas, it's also been increased, especially with the blueprint for education, especially with Medicaid costs that are really running out of control.
So what will that look like as the campaign kind of evolves moving forward if the Republican field starts to take shape and it whittles down to one candidate and we have the general election? How will the governor kind of focus his messaging on spending when it is the general election? How will, the Republican candidate kind of push back on that?
I think a lot of that debate will start after the next Maryland General Assembly session, because there's a lot of unpredictability ahead. And with unpredictability, you could have serious spending cuts. President Trump could get involved in some stuff. What happens if the key bridge money goes away? There are so many factors that are long-term that I think right now, strategy-wise, you have to hammer the governor for what he's done, and the governor should praise what he's done.
When it comes to crime, really quickly, you mentioned that, the governor is really talking about crime. Do you think that we'll hear him talk more about the city state's attorney, Ivan Bates, and his role in reducing violent crime in the city?
I think he'll tag on a lot of that and point out taking success as far as funding the state has done, in that area. I think it's very important to do that because Ivan Bates is a very popular figure. I'm surprised they have not used Marilyn Mosby as a piñata more, basically saying, look how bad things were. Then I came in, because she's an easy target to hit. And I would be more, I am still surprised they haven't kind of used that to say things have changed. And basically, when you say the word Marilyn Mosby among most people, it has a negative connotation. It can't help you politically.
Yeah, we'll have to see how this evolves. John Dede, I appreciate your time and insight as always. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Now, this week, we asked our viewers if Governor Moore deserves a second term. We'll take a look at those responses coming up a little later in our show. And still to come, we're taking a closer look at the state's behavioral health crisis. After 3 deaths in police custody, I sat down with Baltimore City Council President Zeke Cohen to talk about possible solutions. City leaders are demanding answers after 3 people suffering mental health crises died in police custody in recent months. Back in August, Baltimore City Council held a hearing on the city's response to behavioral health crisis calls. Council leaders pushed for better crisis response times and an independent board to oversee the city's behavioral health response.
We need to figure out what it would cost to staff up our mobile crisis response teams so that they can deploy quickly whenever and wherever a crisis occurs. And then we need to find the funding to pay for it.
I sat down with City Council President Zeke Cohen after that hearing to learn more about what he wants to see change when it comes to the city's health department, spending opioid restitution money, and the role of nonprofits in the city.
City Council President Zeke Cohen says less than 1% of calls that go to 911 that are coded as a behavioral or mental health crisis end up being diverted to 988. And if a mental health team does get dispatched, the average response time is 1.5 hours to 2 hours.
That is simply too long. If someone is in crisis, crisis means now. The other thing that we found is that in my analysis, there are simply too many players within this space and not enough organizational management. There is Behavioral Health System Baltimore, which is our behavioral health authority. Then they contract with Baltimore Crisis Response, Inc., and then they are the ones that are supposed to deploy mobile responders. What I would argue is that we, the city, particularly someone within the health department, really needs to own this system. at the end of the day, we are accountable for the outcomes, and so we need to be the owners of it.
Cohen says he believes the delayed response is a capacity problem.
If the capacity to handle this isn't there yet, should the city take a step back to ensure that the capacity is there before the program is launched so that people have the appropriate resources when they do call and they are met with the right team that comes to them?
No, I think this is an opportunity to build on what we do have.
The city's windfall of opioid restitution money leaves leaders with millions of dollars to spend, and Cohen says he wants the money invested, not just spread around.
Look, we have all this opioid settlement money coming online, so now is the time to build the right infrastructure instead of just having all the money go out to nonprofits. And again, I support many organizations that are doing good work in this space, but I think that at the end of the day, residents look at us, it's our names that are on the ballot, and so the systems have to work on behalf of the citizens that live here.
Baltimore is a city that has a lot of nonprofits. There are a lot of organizations that operate in this city, and there's a lot of those organizations that look to this building for sustained funding. Is that era coming to an end based on what I'm hearing?
So look, we welcome all of our partners to be part of reducing violent crime, to be part of supporting people who are having mental health crises, to help with the opioid overdose crisis. We want everyone at the table. But to me, what is really important is that we have developed our own internal infrastructure within city government to be able to deliver great outcomes for our residents. So that means we got to make sure our own shop is in great shape before we are doling out support to our partner organizations.
Some of that internal infrastructure has been questioned. After Dante Melton Jr. died in police custody, there was a renewed focus on the city's communication system. In Melton's case, police called for a medic, but the computer-aided dispatch, or CAD system, was down, and the EMS never got the call.
Should the city use that money to overhaul the CAD system to ensure that the failures don't continue to happen if this really is a communication barrier problem?
Yeah, I think it is a real option to look at, do we need a new CAD system? Ours is old, it has flaws. The commissioner wrote to me and said that there have been 6 breakdowns with CAD that he's aware of. It is concerning that this happened and that it may have contributed to worse outcomes for the people out there.
If that isn't addressed, does it really matter what happens on the back end with the 988 and the behavioral health issues if the calls for service and the calls for help aren't even being reached?
I think that interoperability for any system is extremely important when it comes to, this is a system that touches police, fire, EMS. It also, again, touches diversion to mental health. And so it is extremely important that the CAD system work, that it work every time, not just the vast majority of the time. And that is what we are going to strive to see. And again, that is absolutely part of this conversation we're having about how to fix these systems.
After our interview, I reached back out to Council President Cohen's office, and a spokesperson told me Behavioral Health Services Baltimore sent them a proposed best-in-class model to analyze mental health resources and 911 diversion. City Council is now reviewing that model. Now, in a statement, the Council President says he appreciates some of the ideas from BHSB and looks forward to further conversation, but he does not believe their recommendations go far enough for a best-in-class system. Now, this week, we asked whether you think Governor Moore deserves a second term. We'll take a look at your responses after the break.
Here's tonight's primetime lineup on Fox 45. Brought to you locally by your McDonald's owner-operators.
This week we asked, do you believe Governor Moore deserves a second term? Why or why not? Let's take a look at what some of you had to say, and people were pretty split. Susie says yes, Tesha says yes, and people who said no say it comes down to spending and what happened to the surplus. All right, that's it for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost.